to welcome everybody tonight. My name is Mimi Zukov. I am one of the co-leaders of the Summit Area Green Faith Circle, and as well as a member of the Summit Environmental Commission. We are very, very excited tonight to have this lovely program about why save the Drew Forest. We're very appreciative to the Summit Public Library for hosting our webinar and for co-sponsoring our event. And we also have another co-sponsor, which is the Friends of the Drew Forest. So very, very much looking forward to hearing about why it's important to save the Drew Forest. We have two speakers tonight, Dr. Sara Webb, who is a professor emerita of biology and environmental studies and director of the Drew University Forest Preserves Restoration Project. Her research interests include forest disturbance by wind and fire, paleoecology, seed dispersal, biological invasions, and old growth forests. She is a member of the board of the New Jersey Highlands Coalition. We also have Joe Basralian tonight, who is the chair of the Chatham Township Open Space Advisory Committee and a steering committee member of the Friends of the Drew Forest. And before we get started, I just want to ask everyone to please make sure you're muted and to put your questions in the chat. We will have questions and answers at the end, and I will read the questions from the chat. So with no further ado, Dr. Webb.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you all hear me just fine? If you can't hear me, let me know. Also, thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be with this organization and be able to talk about this work at your university. I am a forest ecologist and retired professor of biology and environmental studies at Drew University. I've been doing research in forests throughout New Jersey and Minnesota and other places for my whole career. And while I was at Drew as a faculty member, I began paying more attention to the forest preserve on campus and started going beyond the ivory tower of research into hands-on pulling out the invasive species and all of that restoration work, which is so important, which many others of you are perhaps involved with in New Jersey today. I am retired from teaching now, but I'm continuing to do this work. I want to emphasize that I am not speaking for Drew University today in any capacity, but just as an individual. I do a volunteer work, do this on a pro bono basis for the university. And so I just want to make sure that that's clear. Coming at the end of my remarks comes Joe Basralian, who, as Mimi mentioned, is an officer of the wonderful Friends of the Drew Forest, and he will talk a bit about the current efforts to make sure the forest does not get developed into housing. So I'm going to leave that part of the discussion to him, but I'm going to talk about the forest itself. Now, the university, as I hope you all know, is a really wonderful nonprofit university in Madison, New Jersey. It's got a wonderful liberal arts college and a great theological seminary, very progressive. The ecology and environmental studies programs are great also. This forest preserve that's on campus is in Madison, the largest remaining forested tract that we have. But it had become over the years rather neglected and degraded, as have all of our forests in New Jersey. Nothing growing on the ground layer except for invasive species, and deer keeping all the small trees away. So that degradation and decline is something we see across northern New Jersey. And there are many others like myself who are doing restoration work on conservation lands and on their own properties. We've been able to reverse that forest decline with a really intensive ecosystem restoration project with lots of incredible supporters. Here's a map. It doesn't show you where Madison is, but this is the town of Madison. If you know it, is Madison Avenue going across the top. And you can see the campus. It's a reverse color picture, but the places that are red are lawn, and the places that are stippled are winter images of the forested parts of the university. So you may have heard of something called the Zuck Arboretum. That's just one section of the forest preserve. It has a couple of ponds and it has a wonderful trail around the two ponds. The whole forest is open to the public. But you better park in visitor parking, and that's something you can consider. Hepburn Woods is another section of the forest that is named for Chris Hepburn, the benefactor who funded the most important thing of all, which is the deer fence that's protected all the vegetation. The rest of the forest preserve, we didn't have enough money to fence in, but it is perhaps one of the more important parts of the forest, as it has the oldest trees. And that's why we didn't focus so much on restoring it. And it has some lovely, lovely dells and wetlands. So we have about 45 football fields worth of woods, counting the ponds. And you can see a lot of greenery here in these pictures because they were taken after we have been doing the restoration project for a while. So we want to remind people this is open to the public. There are a couple of benches. There's even a picnic table down by the ponds. And there's a lot growing in the understory that used to not be there. This is a similar view. And what this shows in addition is some special spots. There are a couple of areas where we have designed biodiversity gardens. These are right near the entrance area that I'm pointing to with my pointer. And they're in those areas because we could reach them with a hose and water the wildflowers as we planted them. And there are other areas that are involved with long-term research on wildlife ecology by Professor Winfelder and her students. We also have long-term research on the invasive Norway maple. There's a vernal pond, and this also shows steep slopes that are in orange. This is a map made for a variety of purposes, but I thought you might enjoy looking. And the rest of this is the campus itself. So I was unable to arrange to show these videos. I don't know if I should try. I think we decided it wasn't going to work, but maybe I will. Just give it a go. Let's see what happens. Very short, but sweet films. I hope you can, hope it comes on.
We can hear it, but we can't see it, Sarah.
Oh no!
You have to click on that screen.
Oh, I was enjoying watching it. I'm sorry you couldn't see it. So I'm going to put these links into the chat later. They're kind of nice visual images of the forest, and it's from the air, from a drone. So what's important about the Drew University forest? Well, all forests, of course, are important to us in this day and age, but water, climate defense, and biodiversity are the sort of emphases I will make today. This is really important area for recharging the water supplies, the groundwater and surface water supplies of our region. And when water filters through forest floors, it gets purified to some extent, and it moderates the rate at which water is flowing through, and not as much runs off and floods the area. These forests are really important, this one and all of our forests, for resilience in the time of climate change that we are now living in. It's a biodiversity hotspot, and that's because of this massive restoration project. It's not massive on most people's scale, but in terms of the region, it's a pretty large area that's got restoration going on. I'll talk a lot about that. And we are hoping that there's going to be a conservation purchase and a future for this forest as public open space. The university, as you may know, is aiming to sell some of this land. So water and flooding, very important area for this part of our lives, the hydrological cycle. There's a lot of glacial topography with dells and a couple of ponds, and it's a major groundwater recharge area. It's on glacial deposits that are filter the water very well. And we have less flooding in the area, less runoff because of having forests around us. These woods keep the water levels up, and source of water in Madison and many other municipalities nearby. Here on the left here is an area of forest that is never wet except after storms and in the early spring. But after Hurricane Ida, it was a massive lake, and it was full of water over a large part of the lower dell in the forest. And it actually drained down into the aquifer pretty quickly. So that suggests, again, the porosity of the land and the ability of it to keep the water on site. And we do have a lot of interesting wildlife associated with the ponds there and the forest itself and the temporary spring wetlands, one of the largest populations of American toads in New Jersey, I'm told. So water is really important, and so is climate resilience. Here's New Jersey during hurricane times. Not so much, has it been 10 years, I think, since Sandy. Now, it's really clear that what we need to do is something called proforestation, which is to keep our natural established forests that are maturing, to uptake the most carbon and to store the most carbon and continue to take it up throughout their lives in proportion to how many leaves they have per unit area. So this is called proforestation as a way to try to protect ourselves from extreme climate changes. There's afforestation, which is planting more trees, and there's reforestation, which is putting more trees in new areas or areas that were already forested. Proforestation is the newfangled word for embodying that fact that the largest and oldest trees, they take up carbon at a greater rate and volume and store more than patches of small trees. This is actually something that a lot of people disagree with and claim to the contrary. It's better to cut down the big trees and replant with smaller trees, but it's not the best strategy at all if you want to have carbon resilience. So this is a really important role of our established forests. In addition to these established forests taking up carbon and giving us climate resilience in that way, they also prevent extinctions, or will, as the forest, as the climate changes. So many of our species are going to have to shift northward or bite the dust. And we need a lot of natural areas as the corridors and stepping stones for species to expand or shift their ranges toward the north. And the Nature Conservancy has done an analysis quite wide across the country, I think. And in New Jersey, central and northwestern New Jersey are a major corridor of that type. So it's something to keep in mind. So here's just a picture of a tree to remind us that the trees are made of carbon mostly. And that's what wood is made of. When you cut down a tree like this, you lose the wood. And if you make it into wood products, you lose about a third of it. So it's not storing as much, and you lose the services that it provides. This tree has tree rings that you can count, and it was 172 years old when it was cut. This, unfortunately, is a New Jersey scene at Sparta Mountain, which is a wildlife management area where many of us have been trying to get our state agencies to do less of this cutting of our best forests. But that's another story. And I just want to point out that our trees are doing a lot to sequester and take up and store carbon. Yeah, well, I'll say a little bit more about that. Here's another picture of the forest subject to what's called forest stewardship plans in New Jersey, which are clearing the canopy steadily on our public forests, wildlife management areas, where the oak is actually worth something. And when you make a clearing like this, it becomes like the Drew Forest used to be. You don't get any new trees because there's lots of deer here, and there's lots of invasive species that will creep in and fill these spaces, as they have done in more in northeastern New Jersey. So there's a big opposition movement to try to bring this to an end. It's billboards around the state like this in the effort to try to stop the logging of our mature forests. But we'll go back to the Drew Forest Preserve, and I have a rough estimate that we have about 6,000 trees in the Drew Forest doing this carbon thing. But that's including a lot of small trees going down to just 1 inch in diameter. We have over 24 native tree species in the forest preserve. Some of them are there because we brought them back. Oh, this is a little bit out of position. This is showing an example of the need for forest habitat to ameliorate or prevent extinctions. And this is an example of a bird that is going to be losing most of its range under a modest scenario of climate change, where it now is found in the red area. It will no longer be able to survive, and it will have to shift north somehow. It's a bird, it probably will make it, but a lot of other species do need a carbon resilience pathway. This kind of mapping has been done by the U.S. Forest Service and National Audubon Society. How do we know about this climate thing and needing old trees? You look at the peer-reviewed scientific literature, because a lot of people just claim that, again, the small trees are just as good. But honestly, the mature large trees and the forests that have them in them are the most important for climate defense. So our forests face a lot of threats, and most of them are quite obvious. Development and forest fragmentation is what we hope will not affect the Jew forest. Deer, you all know about deer. I bet you have, each of you has some stories about deer and how it affects your yards. Invasive species are all over the place, and we've also lost the seed sources for many of our native plants and animals. Even in my 3 decades plus of time at Drew University, I've seen a number of wildflowers and shrub species that were common disappear. So we have a number of threats. And as I've said, the understory of our forest is pretty empty. Before we started the restoration project, this is the kind of scene you have. It's very appealing aesthetically because it looks nice to walk through. And it's only on reflection that you begin to realize there's no future forest here, and there's no wildflowers, and there's no shrubs and ferns. So this kind of empty forest syndrome, which has been named by restoration ecologists, goes hand in hand with the invaded forest syndrome, where invasive species are all that you see. So we have to control deer and invasive plants, and that's really where the focus of this restoration project has been in the Drew forest. And keeping the canopy closed is a really good strategy to minimize the invasive species. So the solution is called restoration ecology. This is actually a very interesting and growing subfield of conservation biology that focuses on bringing back ecosystems that have been degraded or destroyed. If we just try to save as natural areas or all our remaining lands that are natural now, that's not going to keep things going, and we need to try to reclaim the landfills and the coal mines and the degraded lands like our forests that don't have much going on in them across the planet. So coral reefs, restoration is going on in many places, including in our forests in New Jersey by other people. So here's a kind of before and after of the Drew forest. And we have these 3 parts to the restoration project. Put up the deer fence, control the invasive species, and plant the new ones. So I'll show you some fun pictures of that process. The first step, controlling the invasive trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants, which are very numerous from all around the world. And many species that aren't native don't cause harm other than taking space. Others have some very targeted effects, not intentionally. Perhaps the garlic mustard is a really common weed in our area, and its presence actually changes the soil in such a way that the beneficial fungi required by our baby trees disappears. So they actually inhibit reproduction by trees. And Norway maple is a common shade tree around here. It stays green longer than the sugar maples, and it's very successful. And it actually suppresses what grows underneath it. Much more grows under a sugar maple, our native maple, than under our invasive Norway maple. Just for an aside on the subject of the maples, they look very much alike. You can see from the leaves. And the native species has a glossy back to the leaf, and the invasive Norway maple, oops, I don't have a picture of it, has milky sap. The flowers are slightly different. So most people would say, yeah, well, a tree is a tree is a tree. And the Norway maples don't have as many pests because they've left them behind in Europe. And they often green up earlier, but they don't turn red in the fall. So that's a reason to root for the sugar maple. So what do I mean when I say invasive species? There's 3 categories. There's the native species, and those are those species that are found in a place before people started majorly rearranging the biota of the planet. And introduced species or exotic species are those that people have transported across a geographic barrier. Not all of them are invasive. Those include things like I'm trying to think, like probably green beans. I'm trying to think of some examples. Lilacs, a lot of our roses, daffodils, those are from other parts of the world, Japanese maples. Those are introduced, but they're not all invasive. And so many people are focusing only on native species just because they don't have as much ground as they need and to keep the food web alive. And the introduced species don't usually contribute in those ways. But there's a kind of introduced species that we separately call invasive species that spread and reproduce. And those are the ones we really target in the conservation world and in the land management world, trying to bring back ecosystem diversity. So there's invasive species all over New Jersey. We're such a crossroads on the planet. Here's a Japanese barberry, a top selling shrub, very harmful to the soil. It actually changes shifts the form of nitrogen in the soil to a form that's less available to our wildflowers. Here's a massive, this is probably Jockey Hollow, Morristown Memorial, or Morristown Historic Park, a carpet of the Japanese stilt grass, which is very invasive, with a few barberries here and there. So this kind of understories what we see throughout northern New Jersey. Stilt grass on the left. Now here we have a place that's been protected by the deer fencing, and it actually has instead, in the same place approximately, a native jewelweed wildflower, which used to be abundant in the 1980s when I came to Drew University, and then disappeared. And it only came, I tried to find seeds to replant it when we got the deer fence up. Couldn't find them. It came back on its own, which is very exciting. We have invasive vines that are very damaging that pull down trees. The Oriental bittersweet actually converts forests into shrubland. Like you see, this was like 4 acres of the Drew forest had no forest because of these vines. And wisteria, interestingly enough, is very similar. It strangles trees. This is wisteria on a tree flowering. It winds around and strangles the trees and pulls them down. And as they get started, when they're younger, they're on the ground, and they are really impossible to pull up because they have these runners right at the surface that are as tough as steel. So there was we had 2 areas in the Drew Forest Preserve that I called the vine areas that had really been taken over by these vines. And that's what actually ultimately drove me to reach out and try to find help to bring back what had been lost there. And because of so many generous people, donors, collaborators, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the garden clubs of the state and of Madison. The list is very long. I hope I'm not excluding anyone who's on the call, but controlling invasive species, as I was discussing, is difficult. Those bags are all full of the invasive stilt grass. And that is something you have to bag, because if you just put it in a landfill, it'll spread. So you can see the students really have a lot of fun. They're all smiling, getting out of the buildings on campus and doing this for course work, for extra credit, as volunteers or paid interns in the summer. Now, the second big challenge, I don't think I need to say anything about, is the invasive species and the deer. And I did not take that picture, but I love it, so I can put it in there for you. But the miracle that has brought the Drew Forest back to life, and many other natural areas in our region, is controlling the deer. And the best way to do that is to put up a 10-foot deer fence, which, because of the very generous support of Chris Hepburn, the Martin Hepburn Foundation, we were able to do for a portion of the Drew Forest. And yes, it has to be 10 feet high, and we had to get a zoning variance for that because people said, oh, you just need 6 feet. And we convinced them we needed 10. So what has resulted from the deer fence is astonishing. We have a future forest that came back. Here's the yellow. I just took this picture a couple of days ago in the Drew Forest. We have the green maples and oaks up here. And then this layer of yellow seedlings, these are young trees, the future forest of sassafras. Sassafras is deer candy. I never saw it in the Drew Forest for a decade. And when the deer fence went up, we didn't even plant sassafras trees. We planted 1,000 baby trees, but these there was one tree there, and I found that out. So this shrub layer, this layer of the future forest came back, even where we didn't bring in native species. But it's also very important to bring in the species that have been lost in the seed sources. And here's some more things that happened after we protected from deer. We have beech trees resprouting. Beech trees sprout, they reproduce by putting out runners, and all of this line of baby beech trees are on a root system connected to the mother tree. And I never saw that for 15 years at Drew University. And I was like, why isn't this sprouting? Well, now we know why. It was the deer. So we really had a big response. In addition to planting lots of things, we saw a number of species come back on their own, to my surprise. So part one, deer fencing part 2, control the invasive species, which is not done. It's an ongoing thing, of course. And then we have the bringing back of native plant material, that is species that have been lost. And we had wonderful, generous donations, as I said, that made this happen. And so many students were part of this process and really enjoyed it. We've planted over 2,000 tree species, 750 shrubs, almost 1,000 herbaceous native plants by now. And here's my wonderful friend, Brian Marsh of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who was able to arrange a partnership with Drew University where they provided us with tree seedlings, hundreds and hundreds of tree seedlings, his help with controlling the invasive species with herbicide use, which I would never do, but which they knew what they could do safely for wildlife. So students had a wonderful time bringing back the wildflowers as well. And this amazing technique to cover over places totally invaded is to put down cardboard or thick newspaper, leave it for years, and it eventually fades away and the little tree seedlings have a spot to grow in. So the restoration has really resulted in transformation. Here's an early picture, and all those colorful flags are not poison flags. Each of those is a spot where we are going to plant or had planted a wildflower. And that area now, well, 5 years later, 6 years later, look like this. And today it's like a jungle. You can hardly move through it. This is one of our designed gardens. And it's been really amazing how those young trees we planted 2010 or 11 have grown into subcanopy positions. We have really good soil here. And the most important thing perhaps that's happened with this restoration is those vine areas have returned to being forest. There are still some trees from before, but not many, because the wisteria in particular had killed all the trees. And already in just a decade or more, many of them have grown quite tall. We have 24 tulip trees that are forming a forest, and many other trees coming up as well. Some we planted, most of them we planted, some of them we did not, but we have a forest connectivity now that we didn't have in that area before. And I could go on and on all day about the different wildflowers that we have reintroduced and that are thriving, bringing back the pollinators and the diverse insect world that relies on different chemical flavors of foliage, like the monarch does with the milkweed. There's so many others that have other specialized hosts. So that's been very exciting too. And there's some pretty pictures to enjoy what the scenery can look like here to more or less wrap up with some beauty. So just to remind us of the importance of the Drew Forest. And the Drew Forest isn't huge, but its location is surrounded by basically we're kind of in a desert of suburbia. Gives it a special importance to birds, migratory and resident birds. So biodiversity is definitely changed by the presence of this forest where it had been lost. The climate advantages and the water services are hard to quantify, but very important. So we have a diversity hotspot at the Drew Forest. And so that's one of the things that's, I think, one of the most important reasons to preserve it. So much has been invested and so much has come back to provide us an island of nature. And the area is open to the public. There are ponds. There's a nature trail around the 2 ponds. There are other trails. There are benches. There's a picnic table and those wildflower gardens. As I said, it's great for wildlife. Just yesterday, I went over and saw great blue heron in the pond, and turtles are always basking on the logs. So it's someplace to go visit. It has a lot to offer. And we hope that a conservation purchase will happen and there will be a future as open space. So I'll just end by commenting and transitioning over to Joe, who will talk about the future of the Drew Forest. There's a possibility of the forest selling off this land, and there are possibilities that it could be a conservation purchase for open space. Now, we really need to protect our forest across New Jersey. We have a very high population density. We rely on these forests for cheap filtration of water. And in the Drew Forest, as elsewhere in northern New Jersey, the openings don't recover without intervention. So we really should be keeping our forest canopies everywhere. There is deforestation in New Jersey, and I alluded to that before. And that's a struggle that is being fought by a whole huge community of conservation biologists, citizens, and ecologists to try to get the state to stop doing the logging that they are doing on our national or on our state wildlife refuges. So I think I'm going to just stop there with my statements of biodiversity and resilience, protect our forests, mitigate climate change by keeping the forests, keep our dead logs, don't sell timber, wood products, leave the wood, it's habitat, and we need to control the deer and invasive plants. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium over, the virtual podium over to my wonderful friend, Joe Basralian. Joe is one of several amazing people who have come together to make an organization, the Friends of Drew Forest, that is making a humongous difference in the future of the forest. And I can't thank him enough for his leadership, along with others that are part of that group. So he'll tell you about that next. I think I need to stop screen sharing. Yes, stop sharing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, it's because of presentations like yours and places like the Drew Forest that that have given me this urgency in the past 15 years to do something. When I teach my kids, I think we probably all do. If you see a problem and you know it's wrong, don't shy away, do something about it. And I know that, thank you to all of you for joining on this call, because you probably have the same mindset and you care. And thank you, Mimi, and Summit Area Green Faith, and the Summit Library, and the sponsors. I'm going to share my screen. And I'll only take about 7 or 8 minutes if possible. And I think that saving a forest as big as 53 acres takes a lot of people. And it takes people from all the towns all around Madison. So thank you, people from Summit. And I live in Chatham Township, where I'm chair of the Open Space Committee, where we preserve land. And all of us need to pitch in. And this map shows that. The Drew Forest is the green star. It's a little smaller than the green star. And it's right in the middle of the blue patch, which is the Buried Valley Aquifer, defined by the state as a place where water infiltrates down and becomes drinking water for 31 towns. These forests purify that water effectively, cheaply, and so reliably, and do so much more. So all of us can care about a forest that's in the neighboring town or 10 towns over. The world is losing about an acre of forest every second. So in 53 seconds around the world, an equivalency of a Drew Forest disappears. That doesn't mean we have to stand for it in our neighborhood. So many groups have come together and have written letters of support and have argued this forest matters to us. And these are some of them, 6 or 7 towns and many other organizations. And in New Jersey, we see a lot of lawn signs and we kind of get disgusted by them, especially because there are too many in political season. But our beautiful lawn sign, State of Drew Forest, has really helped get the word out, unlike a number of other methods. So these are some of the founding members of Friends of the Drew Forest. And like many of you, I'm sure, on this call, we're out there in the community and talking with other towns, and have gotten so much support from other towns. That's made a difference. I'll get into why even more. These are some of about the 16 or 17 area, local and regional and nationwide nonprofits and scientific organizations that support the conservation and preservation of the forest. Clicking to the next slide. Okay, so land preservation. Drew wants to sell the forest, not because they hate forests, but because they need the money. And they have different reasons why they want the money. So Friends of the Drew Forest started in May of 2021 to say, okay, instead of selling the forest to basically the bulldozers and the high density housing developers, sell the forest to a consortium of a public trust that will purchase the forest, will pay you market value, and it will preserve the forest for all to use, for Drew University professors and students and staff to study and enjoy, and for all of us to continue to enjoy it and look out for it. So this is just a concept slide of how that works. The town of Madison takes the lead, gets money that's already entrusted, that taxpayers have already paid into funds from the county, the state, private foundations, individual donors, and others. They then try to agree on a price with the owner, in this case it would be Drew, and that's how the transaction can happen. And that's a very, very well-established process in New Jersey and around the country. This is a proven way to preserve forest. So this is the Giralda Farms Preserve. It's 130 acres. It's two doors down from Drew Forest, which Drew Forest is right off to where my cursor is, just off the right of this map. In 2014, Chatham Township put together money from 7 different sources, including the county, the Municipal Utilities Authority, State Green Acres, private foundations, private donors, the town, and was able to purchase this land for $14 million. And over 200,000 people. There's a click camera that registers shadows that walk in, and that's the entrance on the left. 200,000 people per year are enjoying this, and it's a glorious place, like many other preserved areas. So this is how conservation success can really happen. We can really do this. Okay, so this is a complicated slide. I'll just talk about it. So what is fair market value for a 53-acre forest? Well, right now it's zoned university, so it's really not worth very much money. 5 or 6 figures maybe, because it can't be developed. So Drew and Madison talked and tried to come up with a way to get a zoning for dense housing development there. They couldn't, as of yet, as far as we know, we couldn't agree. So Drew filed a motion in the Superior Court and said, basically wanted to rewrite Madison's affordable housing plan for Drew to insist, you must zone this in high density because of affordable housing obligations as established by COA and now the state courts. So Drew filed a motion saying that basically much of the Drew Forest should be densely developed. Well, and Madison opposes that motion, but where Drew Forest, with the friends of the Drew Forest, we came in was we realized someone needed to speak for the forest. So we, with the help of a very generous pro bono attorney with a lot of experience, filed an amicus brief to the court. And we outlined all the ways that the forest is incredibly valuable as forest. And the judge took that in and is considering that, and he did not grant Drew's full motion. And the two sides in the court are still going to work out just how much housing could you put on the forest. Well, friends of the Drew Forest, you know, we all know each other well. We know that we want there to be more affordable housing in our area, in our county, in our state. We just feel that there are many places that are so much less ecologically valuable than a forest like the one Sara describes. There are so many areas that are underutilized, that are already paved. We feel that development for high density should be focused on those areas. So we'll go to the next page. This is the last page of my part. It's this is the front page of our website. We have a really beautiful website. That's where those videos are, friendsofthedrewforest.org. And people always ask at the end of when we speak, what can I do? What do you need me to do? Well, first step is you care, and thank you. If you go to our website, you can find a way to sign the petition, and over 14,000 people have. Organizations can write a letter of support and get on that page on our regional support page. That matters. When we go to the county and the state and say, we need funding to purchase this from Drew, they want to say, well, who cares? Well, we can show them that you care, your organization cares. There are other actions there. You can donate. Right now, we're in a drive to raise $15,000 because we know there's more consulting and engineering that can be done. We hired one of the best in New Jersey, and it's a pretty expensive report. It's a lot of people working hard to show just how valuable this land is, and it cost us $10,000. And they said, and they're very trustworthy and known to the conservation community, they said there are 3 or 4 more studies that you can do to more firmly establish that this is the worst place for dense development. So we're in a fundraising drive for that now. You can just share your photos. You can visit the forest. You can share it with your friends and go online. You can just click like and forward. So we appreciate anything you can do, and that leaves, and I'll stop right now and I'll unshare my screen so that Mimi can moderate the Q&A. Oh, let me say something else. You can get in touch with us. If your question didn't get answered, or if you'd just like to say hi, go to our website. It tells you how to contact us. It's info@friendsofthedrewforest.org. I'll stop there and unshare.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah and Joe. It was really very interesting and very hopeful. If anybody would like to drop a question in the chat, I would be happy to read it. And I do have a question. Why does forest stewardship involve logging forests? I mean, it seems antithetical to the concept of stewardship to me.
Well, I feel the word has come to be abused a bit, but there are people who believe that forests need to be thinned to be healthy. There are people whose careers and opinions are that we need wood. We need wood products. That's definitely true, and many people are trained to do that in an optimal way, and in many cases to do it in a careful way. So some people consider that to be stewardship, and if you're a steward of a plantation of planted trees and your goal is to get wood products maximized, then that is a correct use of the term. But there's good stewardship and bad stewardship. And when I got involved with that whole business when I first saw a forest stewardship plan for one of our wildlife management areas that an ecologist was concerned about and was trying to rustle other ecologists and conservation biologists to try to stop that logging. And I was stunned. It was really not accurate. And it, talked about we have to have this stewardship so we can get young forests. And I say, put the young forests someplace else, not where we have old forests. We need to keep the forest healthy. Well, how do you define health? You're going to lose all of the hawks and the thrushes, and you're not going to get an understory back because of the deer. So I disagree with that approach to managing our northern New Jersey forests, obviously, and so do many others. So there's been a heated battle. I don't know, it's been 10, I don't know how long, maybe 8 years that I've been involved, and others longer than that, and successfully negotiating through a couple of fabulous conservation organizations, sat down with the DEP officials and gone to the site with them and argued and discussed and tried to get some of these logging areas reduced in size, which has happened a few times. But it's pathetic because, well, I'm sorry, getting off the topic of the Drew Forest, but it's pathetic because the places they choose to do this logging are the places that have our oldest and best oak trees. And they do take the wood. And I don't think anyone is lining their own personal pockets, but it's a procedure that many people believe is the way you steward the forest. And at the moment, I understand it's difficult for state agencies to get, funding without going to the federal government for U.S. Forest Service plans, which need to have a large component of timber management. So right now, going on a little bit long about this, but it's a key moment in history in New Jersey right now. there was a bill up in front of the legislature last fall that would have required anyone with open space, green acres land, any municipality or agency to have a forest stewardship plan written by a forester. And that was obviously going to be a prescription, and then they would be required to implement it. So there was a very widespread effort, successful, to get people, signing up to try to stop this. And ultimately, the sponsoring senator, it did get through the House, but the sponsoring senator listened. He moderated a forum of presentations that the New Jersey Highlands Coalition put together. New Jersey Highlands Coalition has been a major leader in this, keeping people organized in this effort. And so we've knocked down a few individual plans, but that machinery is still going forward. But in the wake of all that, a forest task force was formed. And some of you may be on this New Jersey Forest Task Force, which has hundreds of people on it. Anyone who signed up on and was able to join many endless meetings and write lots of proposals that no one will ever read, and meet. It was for interminable meetings for the last, for several months. I know Joe's involved with that, and I don't know if there's anyone else here that's on that, in that process. So the hope is that this is going to end up with new legislation, new rules, new policies for how to manage our mature forests in New Jersey. It's not a unanimous group. There's a very strong contingent of those who have the opposite views and are resisting this kind of change. And I think it's by no means certain that there will be an outcome that makes a difference. I'm discouraged at the moment that there's kind of strong defense of the status quo. So that's going on right now.
Okay,
but that's
thank
a
you.
long-winded answer to the question about what is stewardship.
Okay, we have a few other
That's what I wanna know.
questions. How do we find the forest, and are there signs?
How do you
Yeah,
find the forest? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can do that one, Sarah.
Good.
Because I have a map I send people. Deb Ward, thanks for asking that. I can send you my map if you want to email us at info@friendsofthedrew-forest. And you can enter, it's open to the public, as Sarah said. You go on Main Street, Madison. If you're coming from the Summit area, you'll be taking a left up into Drew University. For about 150 yards, there's a kiosk. So a person will come out, you say, I'm going to the Drew Forest. He'll say, okay, where is it? You point to, you go straight up the hill, and there's a large parking lot where you park in. And then you get out of your car, and you can see on the map, it's actually, you go around the outfield of the baseball field that you're parking near, between behind the tennis courts. And there's two gates. There's one for Zuck Arboretum. That would probably be your first walk, because it's a great figure-8 loop. Maybe a little, a third of a mile. Sarah and students have put up signposts and a guided walk booklet, which is there. It's a wonderful and safe walk. And you can also go into a little bit more wild portion, but Hepburn Woods, which you talked about. It's easy.
So can I just edit that? I think that when you come into the campus, it's better not to go as far as that kiosk, but to park in the visitor lot, which is right away. When you get into campus from that main street at the place where there's a traffic light and you pull in, there's a visitor lot on your right, and that's where you should park. I don't think the people at the kiosk know where the Drew Forest is, and they may report it, and they may say you can't come on campus because there's a great hostility right now in the air. But park in the visitor lot. And what I recommend is to get Joe's map. And the other thing you can do is if you Google Zuck Arboretum, it turns out that takes you to a part of the University website that will give you directions to park there and how to walk around the baseball field to come to the entrance. You also can, it's really close to Lewanika Way, but there's really no parking over there. So
I just wanted to say that I followed Joe's directions and took me right where I needed to be. And
good.
Joe took us on some of the members of the Green Faith Circle on a walk around the forest, and it's
right. I saw you there. Right.
Yes, right. And it's very worthwhile. It's just lovely. I would say go very soon before the winter hits. And you'll actually get to see a whole lot of native plants, which is my passion. I did want to mention that when Sarah was saying that they cut down all these oaks, the oak tree is the host plant for 450 native species. So when oak trees are cut down, it's really very, very bad for our ecosystem in general.
That's a
Okay.
really good point. Then those insects, those 450 species of insects, are bird food. And if you like birds but don't care about insects, we need to have our oak trees. Thank you. That's a really good point.
Right, and a lot of those insects turn into moths and butterflies, and they are pollinators, so it's all very important. There was a question about whether you had contacted the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah, that's a great question too, Deb. Thanks. So there are a lot of conservation organizations around New Jersey, and Nature Conservancy is one of the really good ones. So yes, I've spoken with Barbara Brummer, who is the executive director of the Conservancy, a number of times. Their chief of stewardship, Eric Olson, is a graduate of Drew University. So we've had very friendly and helpful talks. Embedded in that question might be, why haven't you preserved it yet? Well, I have to be diplomatic to say that my view, personal views, it's about price. And if you looked at the surrounding quarter-acre to half-acre lots around the forest, and if naturally you'd apply neighboring zoning, if you were to apply that zoning to the areas of forest that maybe could be developed, maybe you'd get to a value of, I'm guessing, $15 or $20 million. It's a lot of money. But based on what I've heard from Drew and the sketches that I've seen them submit, is they're looking for a value of something closer to $40 to $50 million. So we haven't been able, but what's market value now? Very little, way, way less than that, because it's zoned university. So it's really about price. And what's happening now with Drew's motion is they're trying to use the court system to get the value up, and that's certainly Drew's right. And there'll be a discussion that the court will mediate over ultimately where will the value be. So that's why it hasn't been preserved yet.
Very complex. Okay, we have a comment here that says, hi, Dr. Webb, the forest was such a significant aspect of our educational experience. If we are successful with a conservation sale, do you think there will still be opportunity to incorporate students in research?
Hi, Jill. Hi, RJ. And Kara Jean is on here too, another student that worked a lot, all of them in the Drew Forest. And RJ is the chief photographer and bird expert. And so thank you for coming in. Nice to have you guys get in touch. It sounds like the Arboretum section isn't on the chopping block. I know that Professor Winfelder's work on mammal communities has been going on for many years, and it's still going on now. And we can hope it will continue. She has long-term sites that are very valuable at Drew, and also other sites at the Great Swamps Conservation Management Area. That research, I think, will continue. The restoration work, well, it depends on how much of the forest we still have, whether that will continue, but that's, there's a new professor at Drew who's a herpetologist who's very interested in studying the amphibians, the reptiles. And so I think the Drew University has a very strong ecology and environmental program, and we'll make use of it as long as it's there. It depends on what happens. If it's a conservation sale and becomes parkland, then I'm certain, knowing Madison's leadership, that it will remain in a wooded state, and that kind of work would be encouraged.
And the Friends of Drew Forest will also exist in perpetuity to help steward and invite the public and educate the public and speak for the forest if we are successful in that conservation sale.
So we only have time for another question or so, and I did have a question. I understand that there's an endangered species in the forest, and I was wondering if the DEP has gotten involved in preserving the forest.
Yes, that is, so that Sara knows more about the history of the study. Not just more, she knows, I know very little about it. But so our first, the Davie Resource Group, which was Amy Green Environmental, did that first study that I mentioned, and they found likely habitat for various endangered species. The recommendation is to go deeper and to get more evidence of endangered animal species. And that's where I would stop and turn it over to Sara.
I think the most likely species of importance will be bats, which are in the Drew Forest. Whether the one species that's endangered is there or not, it's very hard to study bats. We hope to look more closely. They all hang out in the winter in caves in Rockaway, and then they need deciduous, mature deciduous forest with flaky bark and cavities, which is where they hang around in the summer months and where they breed. So there's not a lot of good habitat for them in New Jersey anymore. The Great Swamp is habitat, and we're not far from that. So it's possible that all the reports that anyone has done from any side of the table has suggested it's likely or possible habitat for that species. That's probably the species we're most likely to find evidence of. But not among the plants because they're so, beat up. But there's a lot of other issues. There's wetlands. There's wetlands that are temporarily wet in the spring that are really important hydrologically, as I mentioned. But there's different kinds of categories of wetlands and different levels of protection for those. So we're in the weeds on that. I don't think that there's we haven't found, the rare three-striped bald eagle or whatever,
Right.
Fantasy we would like to find that's really clearly endangered and needs the forest. But there's such a suite of species, animals, insects, small mammals, birds, and reptiles. There's such a suite, a vibrant community of species that is found nowhere else nearby. So hopefully that kind of evidence will be enough to help protect the forest.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. I think it was a wonderful evening, and we very much appreciate your educating us about the forest and helping us understand how we can help out. And I would suggest anybody who has an interest to go to the website of the Friends of the Drew Forest and get involved. It's really important, and I think the more people that are involved and the more people that speak up and write letters to the editor and that sort of thing, it's citizen action, and we are all citizens, and it's very important. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and look forward to doing more environmental programming together in the future.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Mimi. Thank you to all of you and on all that you're doing. You didn't get the chance to talk a lot tonight, but we know that you are leaders in your own right, everyone. Thank you. We're part of this community together.
Yeah.
All righty. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.